Alright everyone, we're back with another This Week in Fantasy video, the NFL Fantasy Football podcast that I do. We are going to be talking about this last week of the regular season, which was rather tepid and uninspired as the playoff picture has pretty much completely solidified. If we look at the standings here, remember this is with one game left to go in the season. I have clinched the Cursed Lands division because I have both tiebreakers over Seagouch. Clap 4 has clinched his division as the best Jackson can go is 7-7, and obviously Aaron clinched weeks ago. No guest this week, pretty boring and inconsequential week, but I thought it would be worth reviewing since last week was very important. So starting out with the most important game, I faced off against Seagouch, who pretty much typed easy in chat thinking he was going to win and then choked it away. Tom Brady looked very bad in the first half versus Houston, and they managed to lose, but he put up 24 at the end. Kyler Murray looked absolutely horrible versus the Rams. He had like 1 point at halftime. The real story of this game was both Tevin Coleman and George Kittle absolutely eating shit and combining for less than 3 points. After that happened against that Baltimore team that looks very strong, it looked like I was going to lose. However, Chris Carson got a lot of touches, and despite Rashad Penny finding the end zone, he managed to put up 17. Michael Thomas underperformed. Worthless Taysom Hill snatched touchdowns from him. I really wish they would classify Taysom Hill as a running back or a receiver so he would actually have fantasy value. Curtis Samuel had a touchdown in a repugnant loss for Carolina that got Ron Rivera fired. Ron Rivera will always be remembered for that one flash in the pan season where Cam Newton refused to dive for a fumble that he dropped and subsequently cost the Panthers the Super Bowl. That era will be remembered as a failure both with Newton and Rivera. Can't stand either of them. Hopefully the Panthers get a talented head coach and go all in on Kyle Allen. I think the general consensus is Cam Newton is gone because Allen has looked effective and Newton is injury prone and sort of this gimmicky player who has really fallen off super hard. Devin Singletary has rewarded my patience, and he's pretty much the bell horseback of the Bills now. He got 16 in a humiliation of the Cowboys. Will Lutz got a droopy 14 in a solid win versus Atlanta for the Saints. The Panthers somehow managed to only put up 4 versus Washington. And as far as Seagouch goes, Sanders for Philly looked good, and it's sort of interesting because Alshon Jeffrey also had a great week, but Philly managed to lose. You know, when you look at Dallas and appreciate how absolutely abysmal they are, it is sort of jaw-dropping that Philly manages to suck even more penis. I mean, that just really is a head-scratcher. I don't even understand how that works because Dallas is a completely fraudulent joke of an organization, and at this point Jason Garrett is just letting... or rather, Jerry Jones is just letting Jason Garrett hang himself. He's just giving him the rope to hang himself with his own ineptitude. Tyreek Hill failed to have a big week despite Kansas City putting up 40. This is a very Seagouch type player, boom or bust, and this week he busted even though they put up 40. Jason Myers had 13, which was scary because Seagouch and I were tied going into Monday Night Football. I had Carson left, he had Myers left. So that was interesting. The Packers managed to put up 10. Danny Dimes, aka Daniel Worthless, managed to get hurt. You know, he fumbles about every game and throws an interception to boot. He's a turnover machine. Eli Pussywillow's coming back. I hope he goes undefeated to embarrass ownership. So overall, Seagouch loses a heartbreaker and is relegated to the wild card spot. What does this mean? It means that he'll have to pay the 25 to get into the league next year because the division winners get their money back. It also means he has to face off against Aaron next week. So let's look at Aaron, who only put up a flaccid 77, and this is just classic Cam. You know, if he wasn't the commissioner's kid, he would have been booted years ago. Started 2 guys who were inactive going into the week. These weren't guys who were questionable. These weren't guys who it was very, up in the air if they were going to play or not. They were straight inactive. And, Cameron is the sort of guy who won't answer his phone for a month and then tell you that he's been busy. more like been inactive and been worthless. And if you look at the core of Cameron's team, Gordon, who has become the bell horse back as Eckler has taken a back seat, although obviously he missed the first few games holding out. Shout out to him for hamstringing his team, and yet another disappointing Chargers season. McCaffrey only put up 10 in a fraudulent loss, but this is just absolutely repulsive from Cameron. He does this at least twice every year, starting inactives, and sometimes a guy who is questionable slips through the cracks. This is just inexcusable. And this is the sort of thing that could have potentially impacted playoff seeding if things were a little bit different. So this is just complete fraudulence from Cameron, and he does it every year. No Fried and Ben. Ben wins solidly. And No Fried had a chance to run the table, but he choked on Chode. If we look at his team here, not a lot going on. Tyreek Cohen really had the opportunity to run all over a soft Dallas defense, but Montgomery actually got the lion's share of the action in that game. Pretty fraudulent performance by him. I play him this upcoming week. Jackson had a rough time because Nick Foles shit the bed so badly he got benched for Gardner Minshew. Jacksonville was completely relying on Nick Foles being the sort of above average solid player he was in Philly. Obviously he broke his collarbone. Shout out to Alex Lowe, since it's Jackson's team after all, so the joke lands. And Nick Foles has been immensely disappointing. I'm sort of wondering where Nick Foles is going to go because Minshew has looked relatively solid, and there are a lot of teams that really need a quarterback. For instance, I think Nick Foles would be better than Dak. You look at teams like Miami and Washington. Haskins has just looked like a laughing stock. Imagine Lamar Jackson who can't throw and is half as talented. That's Haskins, okay? So, they might move Nick Foles, but Jacksonville, aka Saxonville, Flash in the Pansonville, these guys have looked like utter frauds and disgraces since they went to the playoffs. Just one bed shitting after another. They traded mouthy Jalen Ramsey, who was tired of the shit eating. And Jackson did have, Walker and Snell do pretty well. But other than that, he was having some trouble. Obviously, Fournette has been ranked highly. He hasn't really found the end zone, but he's the entire Jaguars offense. And Alvin Kamara has been immensely disappointing. This is a guy who got taken top 4 in every league, and he's not top 10 in rank. Weston beat Lilly, who gives a fuck, best he can go is 500. And Spencer manages to win versus Sam, who from the beginning of the year I said was shit, and he has proven me right week after week. So let's move on. Let's start with my game versus Mark. This is a relatively boring game. There is not a lot going on. It means virtually nothing. Let's just go back to the standings. So I have 9 wins and the commish has 9 wins. But because Aaron has 12 wins, the commish and I are locked in the 2 or 3 seeds. It's just interchangeable. And this isn't worthless ESPN where there's a home field advantage, aka someone getting 2 points because they're arbitrarily the home team, which is obviously in fantasy football doesn't exist. There are ESPN leagues that do that, and if you were involved in any leagues like that, you should personally feel bad, especially if you were the commissioner. And at this point, since the matchups don't matter at all, legitimately, they literally don't matter at all, we're just going to talk about the point totals here and sort of reflect on the end of the season. If we look at points for, I was leading the Cursed Lands division with Seagouch coming up behind me, Weston coming up behind him, and then Lilly coming up way behind as the caboose. If you look at the differences, about 70 between Gouch and I, about 50 between Gouch and Weston, and then about 110 between Weston and Lilly. Lilly, again, a bottom tier finish. It's interesting that Weston is basically going to be playing for 500. I'm sure it's not the sort of season he wanted to show off to this Billy character, but maybe they can listen to Matthew Berry's podcast together and play some of those goofy playoff fantasy challenges for the people that missed the playoffs. 2-0 versus Weston this year. Stay easy, Weston. We look at Clap for here, and he has had the best season out of his division by far. Jackson and Spencer are virtually tied for points, with the new guys just being really bad right around the bottom with Lily. And if you look at the points for, no one except for Lily and Sam are at 1100, and they might actually fail to reach 1100 after this last week. So he's been horrible. Spencer, of course, probably the most shocking storyline of this season. Best he can go is 6-8, which is his worst finish. He's been very, very quiet, and this is sort of funny to me because Spencer's always been a guy who's talked a fair bit of shit, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with talking shit, but Spencer has outright told me, yeah, I don't talk shit unless I'm favored. That's not really how talking shit works. You talk shit because you think you're better than the other person, and frequently it's Seagouch and Spencer who are going at it, or Seagouch and Jackson. And I know that Spencer respects Jackson, but Spencer definitely doesn't respect the Gouch. And it's sort of funny to me how quiet Spencer has been this year. If you think you're the best, figure out a way to fix your team. This is a guy who is always active on the waiver wire and frequently will talk about how he's just blown away by how people are inactive on the waiver wire and how people miss the easy pickups. Well, Spencer hasn't done any trades to fix his team. Obviously, it's not like he's gone inactive or anything like that, but you sort of come off like a soft bully whenever you only talk shit to Seagouch when he has a horrifically losing record, and then whenever it looks like you're a bit of an underdog, you're as quiet as a field mouse. So, be interesting to see if Spencer can come back next year. If we look at points scored against, obviously he had a bit of a tough road with having the most points scored against him, but looking in terms of points scored, he's below Jackson, he's below the commish, he's below the Gouch, he's below me, he's dead even with Weston, who also has a losing record. He's basically dead even with No Fried, who has a losing record, and he's behind Aaron, so a very middling point scored. This is not one of those situations where he's putting up the most points in the second most points in the league and having to face the guy who scores the most. And that's sort of how Spencer likes to paint it, so don't believe that obvious lie. Sam's a fraud. He's missed the playoffs every year. At least he's active, but I honestly think that he should be looked to be replaced at some point because, he's just not really adding anything to the league. He's not active on the message boards. He's just sort of a filler, as it were. Aaron, of course, has had a great week and a great year, rather. He put up 77 last week and squeaked out a win. Big fucking deal. He's sort of falling off a little bit here at the end, which is interesting because historically Aaron has been a team that drafts well, but sort of manages himself into the poorhouse. But his team has been so good and so unfuck-upable that wasn't possible. It really helps a lot when you have the rank 1 defense and kicker. You don't really have to worry about streaming much at all. And if we look at Aaron's team here, pretty much every one of these guys has been an automatic start every week. Lockett and Cooper are both guys who have been the number 1 target of their offenses undisputably the whole season. Lamar Jackson obviously is an MVP frontrunner. If Christian McCaffrey wasn't on a terrible team, you might be able to make a case for him, but as it stands, Jackson is leading his team to a great season. Dalvin Cook has stayed healthy and is part of a ground and pound offense. This is really the cornerstone of Aaron's team, the ranked 2 running back in the league who just gets an insane amount of touches. Eckler has actually stayed decent despite Gordon coming back, another big question mark that is completely broken in his favor. And Devontae Parker has actually been decent. It's funny because Miami sort of was losing on purpose for weeks and weeks, and now they're just doing a lot of high-risk stuff, a lot of interesting plays. Like remember that terrible Colts play that always inspires a laugh, where they have like one lineman and a guy in shotgun and everyone on the corner? Well, like Miami did that and it actually worked because the team they were playing was such a joke. As far as Aaron's bench, it is very, very thin. Mozart had a good week last week, and the weird thing about San Fran is anytime Mozart has a good week, it's usually followed by a bad week, I guess with the exception of the last week. So anyway, Aaron's team looks very scary. But going back to the divisions as I click every incorrect tab, excuse me, Ben and Cameron have both had disappointing years. Obviously, Ben has at least been active, but Cameron has been inactive and bad. No Fried has been pretty bad. It's funny because I feel like Ben, out of all these teams, had the most potential. Bell has been disappointing. Rogers has been pretty disappointing. He's picked it up as of late, but certainly wasn't worth taking in the second round. He's had a couple huge weeks that have inflated his total rank. But if you look at Ben's team as a whole, I see a lot of high-risk, long-shot picks that didn't work out. You know, he takes Kareem Hunt and rosters him for basically the entire season, and he's doesn't obviously he was suspended, kicking the shit out of that woman. And you know, he's broken 10 the last 2 weeks, but Ben had already been out of it by that point. AJ Green hasn't fucking played all season. I love AJ Green. I try to draft him every year, but even I knew to stay the fuck away from this guy. There was no way in hell he was playing. So, overall, Ben's team pretty shallow and uninspired, but at least he's not starting inactives like Cam Joke. So let's just sort of shadow box the playoffs and how it's going to happen. So we're going to have Rampy and the Gouch, and then me and the Commish. I'm really hoping for a me and C Gouch finals to really rep our division well. That would be very interesting. If we look at the Commish's team, he has two guys who have gotten a ton of touches, both Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry. Chubb hasn't been too badly effective by Kareem Hunt coming back. Prescott's great at putting up those empty yardage numbers. There's so many dim-witted Cowboy fans who look at Dak's yards total and think that he's a top-tier quarterback or think that he's developing. Look at these interception totals. 1, 1, 1, 3, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. He's had a fumble lost, but he puts it on the turf more than he loses it. And overall, Dak has just been a very, very poor quarterback this year in terms of development. Yet, because he puts up empty yards in garbage time, he gets a lot of undeserved credit. This is the sort of guy who's good fantasy-wise and terrible in real life. He has virtually not developed at all since his rookie year, and the Cowboys should let him walk along with Garrett. Cole Beasley, he's been relatively good recently. Obviously, he had a career game in the embarrassment of the Cowboys. Adrian Peterson, who is ancient, has had his moments where essentially anytime Washington scores, he's the guy to do it. I don't really see a lot on Clapfor's bench here to be proud of, and what's funny to me is Clapfor has Mahomes, and he's in this position where Dak is putting up a bunch of empty stats, so he has two great quarterbacks, yet, he hasn't tried to move one of them. I'm pretty sure he had a third quarterback at one point. I can't really recall who it was, but the Commish has a solid team here. This Rojas guy is pretty shitty, though, to be honest. He has both the Saints and the Cowboys. If we look at the schedule, Saints are going to be playing Indy in the playoffs. Cowboys are going to be playing the Rams. So neither one of those are that good matchup-wise. I guess Indy's okay, depending on Brissett's injury. If we look at Keenan Allen, this is a guy who pretty much gets yards every year, despite the Chargers perpetually underachieving. Look at Carlos Hyde, a whole lot of meh. This is a solid team, though. It's real top-heavy, with the double good quarterbacks for fantasy and both of the guys who get lots of touches. And that is pretty much going to be the video. It's pretty boring when there is literally not a single thing to play for in the final week. But I will be back next week, probably with a guest. Hopefully Seagouch, Jackson, or Spencer are going to be my target guests. But we'll see what happens. Make sure you like and comment on the vid.